Welcome to the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. And now your host, Sonia Esther Soltani.
Hi, welcome to the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. I'm your host today, Sonia Esther Soltani. I'm the editor-in-chief at Rapaport and jewelryconnoisseur.net. And today I'm very excited because we have with us Ben Macklowe, the president of the Macklowe Gallery in New York. And the reason why I wanted Ben to come on this podcast to discuss education and estate jewelry is because the Macklowe Gallery is doing a fantastic job at educating and furthering knowledge about estate jewelry. If you haven't registered to their newsletter, I would encourage you to, because they share beautiful pieces, but not just the beautiful pieces, but also the history, the context, and in which they were created, as well as historical periods. So, hi, Ben. How are you?
I'm very well, Sonia. It's so nice to hear your voice again. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. So before we get into the fantastic educational program you have for your clients, but also for potential clients, I would like you to tell us a bit more about how the Macklowe Gallery started.
Sure. My mother, Barbara, and my father, Lloyd, were married in 1964. And when they got married, they were actually quite poor and couldn't afford new furniture. They got married in the rabbi's study, and working class might be better than poor, but they didn't have much. And it got them actually thinking about what they could buy that wasn't new and what they could afford. And they started looking at the merchandise offering ads in the Saturday and Sunday New York Times, and they would go to the local diner and with a roll of dimes and call people in the phone book, who had listed that they had things for sale, and they'd go and they'd start looking at things that they could afford for themselves. And it got them appreciating the idea that maybe some of the things that weren't new were worth owning, which was a relatively radical concept in early 1960s America.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward a little bit, my mother was a school teacher and was invited over for Friday night dinner at another teacher's home. And it turned out that this teacher's mother-in-law was a woman named Minna Rosenblatt. For fans of the Tiffany lamp world, Minna was one of the very first in the pioneering group of all entirely Jewish women from the greater New York area who rediscovered Tiffany, rediscovered Art Nouveau, and started to offer it to the general public in a very organic fashion. At the time, Minna was living in Brooklyn. She kept her things in the basement and sold out of her house, but she also exhibited at antique shows. Strangely enough, she was exhibiting that very weekend at an antique show at the old Madison Square Garden, which is now where Worldwide Plaza is in New York City in the 40s on 9th Avenue. And my parents were at this dinner with their friends, and they had this beautiful Tiffany chandelier over the table, and my mother and father had never seen anything like this before. And they thought it was just beautiful, and it was covered in flowers, and it was evocative. And my father said, well, where can we get one of these things? And he said, well, my mother sells them. And my dad said, great, how much would something like this cost? And the guy said, $500. And my father said, are you crazy? $500 for a lamp? So, fast forward 45 years, 50 years actually, 55 years now, and now somebody will say $500,000 for a lamp? Are you crazy?
A Tiffany lamp.
The numbers have changed, but the reaction is often the same. Anyway, my parents went the next time that Minna was exhibiting. They bought a beautiful piece of Tiffany art glass for $35. She allowed them to pay for it in 5 weekly installments of $7, and it got them hooked. My mother had always been a collector. As a little girl growing up in Brooklyn, she got really good at marbles. So she could beat all the other boys at marbles and all the other girls too. And she could put together a collection of marbles, those little glass beads with the different colors and the different decorations. And that was really why she played them. It wasn't so that she could just have marbles. It was that she wanted to see the decoration. And she would press autumn leaves between the pages of books. And my father as well, even as a young person, always loved beautiful things. They just didn't know anything, and they had no art history background. So they just sort of learned as they went along. And so this was well before they were ever involved with jewelry. And they started exhibiting themselves at antique shows, and they were selling basically American art pottery. Have you ever heard of any of the makers like Rookwood or Van Briggle?
No, can you tell us a bit more about them?
Yeah, so I'm going to try not to be overly verbose, but this is a podcast. So basically, at the end of the 19th century, when
And it's about education. So
allow me to educate you then. So at the end of the 19th century, so many people in Western Europe and in the United States were leaving their farming communities and moving to cities and making a wage for the first time, as opposed to working in the barter economy. And because of advances in unionization and labor laws, they also had time off that they'd never had before, because it doesn't matter if it's Christmas Day on the farm. The horses need to be fed, the cows need to be milked, etc. But when you moved to the city and you were working in a factory job, on Saturday, the factory was just closed. And so this combination of people making a wage, living in a place away from their families, or maybe even moving from another country to be in these cities, combined with leisure time, started to make people look at their homes in a different way. And also technological advances made it possible to make beautiful objects of art for the home at a lower price. So, for instance, I don't know if you know, but for the 1851 exhibition in London that Victoria's husband
the
Albert
great
ran,
exhibition,
the
yes, yeah.
Crystal Palace, the Great Exhibition of 1851. One of the things that was introduced the first time there was the idea of electroplating, which is where you could take the original of a sculpture and using conductivity actually create a replica of it out of metal. And that made it possible to make a beautiful work of art and then to make it available to the mass public. And similar things were being done in pottery with molding as well. And a lot of and things were being made in sort of an industrial scale, and it started to fill people's homes. In the Art Nouveau period, which was sort of a reaction to some of this industrialization, people said, well, we can make things using some of these techniques, but they still have to look like they're handmade. And so there was just this explosion of creativity in this period. You'll see it in the jewelry world, mainly with silver. The idea of having a silver service at home was unheard of for anybody except the wealthiest people until about 1860. And then you start to see the English and the Americans and the French, to a lesser extent, making silver that people could afford. And then all of a sudden, every middle-class home had to have a silver service. And in ceramic, my parents really fell in love with the work of Rookwood and Van Briggle, which were both American pottery companies. Van Briggle was in this region, but Rookwood was in Zanesville, Ohio, near Cincinnati. And they made things that were quite beautiful. And so my parents would go up Route 7 in Connecticut and on the weekend, and they'd buy these pieces for $3 and $5, and they'd come back to the city and sell them to the dealers who had stores for $7 and $10. And this was all while keeping their day jobs. And they started to think, wow, this is a great way to make a living. And then they started exhibiting at antique shows, and all they had was pottery for sale. And so they would sell probably 80% of the pottery they were going to sell in the first 4 hours of a 5-day long show. And then for the rest of the time, my mother would be sitting there twiddling her thumbs. My father would be sitting there twiddling his thumbs. So my mother would walk around, and she, being a smart woman, noticed the people who sold jewelry tended to be busy the entire show. And she loved jewelry. So she said to my father, Lloyd, we have to start selling jewelry. And he refused. He said, Barbara, we're pottery dealers. That's what we do. And she said, that's ridiculous. We're dealers of beautiful things. We just happen to be selling pottery right now. We have to sell other things too. And so he finally relented. And, she got one of those little wooden, tabletop cases with the glass thing that, tilts up. But everything she had, they had to be able to sell for $25 or less, which even in the mid-60s was a really difficult price to achieve. So my mother got very good at buying Art Nouveau and Victorian jewelry in silver, very good at Georgian guard rings and other things that could be had for a price. And that's how they got started in the jewelry business. And there were no books about jewelry connoisseurship in the 1960s. And what books there were about Art Nouveau connoisseurship were all in French, and my parents didn't speak French. So they really learned by doing, which is, for anyone listening to this podcast, that is the best way to learn, is by doing it and making mistakes and figuring it out.
Is it how you learned yourself? How did you always know that you were going to join the family business, and how did you make your own education?
Well, I was absolutely certain I was going to be starting first baseman for the New York Yankees. Just that hanging curve. I actually really had no idea I was going to join the family business. After a brief flirtation with a baseball career that ended when I was about 14, I went through school. I'm a very ardent ecologist, and I thought that working for the betterment of the human and natural ecosystems would be where my passion would lay. And after college, I realized that it was sort of hard to find a job doing those things. So I went and taught elementary school for a few years, and then I sort of backed into the business by accident. My father was on a business trip, and the flu ran through the gallery, and my mother just called me up and said, "I know you're doing some other things, but if you're not busy, could you just put on a suit and come into the store, because otherwise I can't open. There's just not enough of us." And she did, and I did. So, and after a week or so, I left, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll give this a try. But I had no education at all. I never even took an art history class in college, much to my, I don't want to say my shame, but much to my chagrin, because, it's forced me to play a lot of catch up in my career. But I think it's okay, because I feel like I can speak to people who want to buy things on a level that they understand, and in a way that's not going to intimidate them, because I'm learning all the time as well. So for me, education is not about something I have that I don't share. Education for me is about something I'm just figuring out that I want to hip you to. I want the other person to be as excited as I am. And so I'm learning. Right now we're in this Corona lockdown, and I've got 2 little kids at home, so I don't have as much free time as I would like. But I'm listening to wonderful jewelry podcasts as well, and reading wonderful blogs. Actually, the jewelry community, particularly the estate jewelry community, has really been turning out fantastic content during this period. So I'm learning every day as well.
And that's very interesting. I also think like there's been such a burst of webinars and Instagram lives, and fantastic. I mean, the virus is terrible and harrowing situation for the whole world, but in terms of knowledge and sharing knowledge, it's been really such a beautiful time actually to to connect with people and learn so much together. But before this happened, and how did you feel like knowledge is so important before you can appreciate a piece of estate jewelry? Because some of them, I guess, is a complete emotional decision when you see a romantic piece of Victorian jewelry, or you can see the floral pattern in Art Nouveau. Something appeals to you in Art Nouveau, in Art Deco, but how do you feel to educate, to share knowledge with a potential client, make the whole experience different?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Sonia, and it really speaks to a lot to psychology. The most primal human fear is to be murdered, but the second most primal human fear is to be shamed, and to be shamed publicly. So very often people just buy what everyone else has, which of course the large jewelry brands are brilliant at letting you think you need another Alhambra necklace or another love bracelet, and all these sort of iconic pieces that have that are guaranteed not to get you mocked by anybody, and also, have their own aesthetic value. So when we have a client meeting with us, whether it's in person, on the internet, whatever, the first thing we have to figure out is how to put them at ease, because it's very rare for a client to come to us and say, "I'm a collector of such and such. I see that you have, that piece on your website. I'd like to have a deep, meaningful conversation with you about it, because I'm educated enough that I really, really get excited having these conversations." Obviously in my, platonic world, I would love for those conversations to be happening every day, but usually that's not the case. Even with good clients, we're usually starting close to what I would call ground, not zero, but very close to the beginning of a conversation. And in a sales journey, because we are ultimately a business, figuring out where the customer is in that sales journey is the very first thing we have to do. Because if I start having a high level conversation with somebody who doesn't even know who Tiffany was, or doesn't know who Lalique was, or Cartier, then I'm just going to be alienating them immediately. So my first thing is always, who is the person walking in the door? What is their goal in this conversation with me? Is their goal information? Is their goal to make a purchase? What can I do to help them realize what they're hoping to do here? And then I can tailor my educational conversation to that level, because the more, in a gallery like Macklowe Gallery, where we don't have anything that's a multiple, where we don't sell diamond engagement rings by the boatload, it's just not what we're good at. The more you know, the better our stuff looks. The more educated you are, the more you've seen, the more you've handled, the more, oh my God, this place has amazing stuff. And actually, some of our very best clients, Sonia, are other merchants or other dealers because they have that level of education and that level of confidence where they can look through our stock and say, this is great, this is great. Well, this I don't need, but and they can start, we might not always get together on price, but when it comes to aesthetics, they already start at such a high level, and education, they've already got such a high level that we can have those conversations. So some of my favorite people to do business with are members of the trade. It's actually great fun for me because then I do get to have those conversations. And the clients who are open to the education are really showing themselves now because we've been sending out, as you said, our newsletters. And at the beginning of Corona, we were sending one out every day, Monday through Friday. And we've decided to ralentir, to slow it down to 2 days a week. Although our Instagram is still a daily feed, we figured that the emails were starting to come a little too hot and heavy. But what's interesting is how many of our clients actually take the time to write us an email to comment on what we've sent. And you can really see the people who are doubling down on their education by who's responding and how they're responding. Some of them are responding with questions or saying, hey, I saw this on another website or in a book, and how does it compare? And that's exciting for us.
That's very interesting. I mean, your glimpses of beauty, I have to say, they always brighten my day when I see them in my inbox. So,
oh, good. I'm glad. Feel free to share them liberally.
Yes, a bit every single day. What's interesting, as you said, that a lot of your clients are other dealers that have the expertise, the appreciation of the unique, exquisite pieces you have in the gallery. But for clients, what you notice, there's some areas, some periods, some styles that are more difficult to access, and they need a bit more of your guidance.
Yes, I do. And we seem to specialize in eras that are hard to access. People live a much less formal way than we used to. And if this quarantine does anything, it's going to, I think, accelerate that since we've all been sitting around in our pajamas for a month. So jewelry that was created around a woman who is dressed formally is a lot harder for clients to gain emotional access to. So a Victorian pair of gold earrings might be a very easy thing for a woman to understand and to love, or a heart pendant. But a big diamond and silver top diamond en tremblant floral spray is about as far away from the way most people are living now as you could imagine. So that becomes a very difficult thing to interest people with.
And I'm just going to make the point even more valid by asking you to actually describe this piece that you just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the great pleasures of having all of the masterful jewelers of Victorian England was making things that actually could be, where the flower heads could be put on a little gold spring so that as a woman moved, the flower head looked like it was trembling in the breeze, like an actual flower. So they called that en tremblant or trembleuse. And it was something that Queen Victoria loved. And as whatever Queen Victoria liked, obviously filtered its way down through the buying public. And so you'll see very frequently a brooch that will be somewhat asymmetrical with a stem and leaves, and then either one or more than one flower blossom that is sitting away from the rest of the brooch, and it has the coil that I mentioned on the back, and it will move as the wearer is moving. And this was very, very popular in what we call the High Victorian period of 1860 to 1900, or 1860 to 1880, and even through the late Victorian through 1900. But it's not something that's being done so much today.
And are there other more opaque pieces of jewelry that need more explanation as well when someone sees them?
Yeah, sure. Well, probably the ultimate version of that for what we sell is Art Nouveau, because on one level, you've got Art Nouveau jewelry, which is enameled and flowers and gold, and it's very easy to understand aesthetically. And so that part's no problem. But the really avant-garde Art Nouveau was very psychologically complex and very often was telling an allegorical story. And so all of these are things that you have to have a certain level of education to even understand what you're looking at, to have the vocabulary to talk about it. It's sort of like if you're looking at Renaissance portraiture, the color of the clothing the person was wearing, the types of clothing the person was wearing was denoting not just their social status, but also different states of mind. And I'm no expert in Renaissance portraiture, but it's something that I think applies here as well. That, for instance, Lalique, we have a beautiful necklace right now by Lalique of two dragonflies. And what is unclear to anybody, unless they really know, is that the two dragonflies are actually mating, and they're it's sort of in a love embrace, which is a very interesting thing for a woman to be wearing around her neck, and it's quite provocative. But it's only provocative to the person who knows what he or she is looking at. And so there are things like that that make Art Nouveau very, very satisfying for collectors and somewhat inscrutable to new people.
Mm. And do you think, how do you see, I mean, I guess you must have had this conversation with your parents as well, do you see the public being more interested and more educated in estate jewelry and antique jewelry, or actually maybe the previous generation of when your parents started had more curiosity? What do you see?
I think that the explosion of interest in my parents' generation and in the baby boomer generation in collecting in general, whatever it was, whether it was cars or jewelry or paintings or furniture or ceramics, was unprecedented in human history. And the group and the generation of people who became dealers in my parents and the generation right after them didn't realize, because it was their contemporaries, that it was an unusual thing that was happening. So we also had just an explosion of the upper middle class and the middle class, which is something that since 20 years has been evaporating. So there are fewer people collecting everything now. Even contemporary art has fewer collectors than it did 20 years ago, which is a little known fact. That's why there's so many galleries that are going out of business right now, is because they had a very thin collector base to begin with. So there's that. But on the same side, the explosion of information has made it possible for people to be much more excited about collecting, and also to participate, even if they don't have the money, by coming to galleries like ours, by looking at our website, by reading, by listening to my videos, by going on the various sites and watching, reading blogs, etc. So there's a lot of people, I think, who are collectors in their heart, but might not have the financial capacity to do so. And I actually see an enormous amount of interest in unusual things, not just in the typical stuff. And it seems that the online community, if you will, is more interested in things that they can't expect to find between the pages of a fancy magazine.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. And what about the people, the clients of yours that are not other dealers? Who are they? And I know it's difficult to put them in a group, but what do you see? What's the most surprising type of client that goes through the door of the Macklowe Gallery?
Well, we when we moved the gallery off of our ancestral home on Madison Avenue to this greatly expanded premises on the corner of Park Avenue and 57th Street, was only a quarter of a mile away, but it changed our business quite profoundly. We have many, many more people walking through the door, or at least we did until March 13th, many more people walking through the door than we had on Madison Avenue, which was surprising to us. And so the people we have buying from us really run the gamut. We have clients who are in their 20s who are interested in buying something beautiful. It's usually a self-purchasing woman in her 20s or 30s. And then all the way up to our clients who have been with us for many years. And because our jewelry collection starts around 1800 and goes all the way through to the present day, we get a lot of different people interested in different things. And, for me, the not Rosetta Stone, that's the wrong term. The ultimate great client is the self-purchasing woman. I just love when a woman who makes her own money comes in, enjoys the process of shopping for her own things, picks it, and pays for it. Nothing against the men listening, but it's really sexy when a woman can buy herself jewelry. Because traditionally, yeah, it is. It's funny, but traditionally, it's always been something that was a gift given by a man to a woman who received it, and she might not even have anything to say about what was given to her, much less the decision-making and the paying power. And that's really started to shift. And for me, that's very exciting because ultimately the person who's using the jewelry should be the one who's most invested in what piece of jewelry she's getting. And so I think as we have women more and more enfranchised in the workplace and making more and more money, we're going to see that more and more, which for me is going to be just fabulous because it takes you one step closer to the conversation that you and I started to talk about before of education. When a man comes in looking for a gift for his wife, it's a very different conversation from if they're there together, which is still different to if she's there by herself to purchase for herself. And I find that the conversations with women purchasing for themselves much more satisfying, much deeper. They ask much better questions that are much more open-ended, rather than just like the guy saying like, is she going to like this? You know, like if I give her this, am I going to get laid? I hate to sound crass, but let's be honest. You know, and you know, it gets back to that same thing I said before. You know, the second greatest fear is of public shaming. And even me, I mean, I'm 49 years old. I've bought tens of thousands of pieces of jewelry in my life, but when it comes time to get something for my wife Hillary, I don't like to surprise her with things because I like her to be part of the process. Because if I get her something that she doesn't like, then she feels obligated to tell me she likes it, and then she feels obligated to wear it, and, you know, all this nonsense, you know, only to say to me very politely 6 months later, you know, sweetheart, there's something in the gallery's collection that I think I like better than this. Do you mind if I trade? You know, yeah, exactly. We stopped doing that about, no, 8 or 9 years ago. We're much happier now. You know, so I think
Hilary in a gallery that she had a coup de cœur, a crush for.
Well, I'm sorry, would you say that again?
What was the latest piece that Hilary had a crush for in a gallery?
Let's see, what was the latest piece she had a crush for? Let me think about that for a second. Oh, we bought a beautiful little ring by René Lalique, actually of 2 dragonflies, but it was very unusual. It was a ring towards the end of their jewelry of his jewelry creations, because it was done in platinum with a baguette cut diamond. Very unusual. And I bought it, and she just loved it. And she put it on. She goes, "Ooh, that might need to be mine." And then I showed her what I paid for it. She says, "Ooh, that might need to be somebody else's." And, but you know, the best part about working in the gallery that she does, and you know, running the business with me, is that she gets to take lots of pieces home, which is nice. But she also gets to wear them and see if they're really right for her. And that's also been part of the education process for me, is understanding that I have to be willing to be flexible with my clients as their tastes evolve. So somebody might buy something for me 6 months ago, and maybe they'll love it forever, but maybe they're going to come back in 6 months and say, you know, I think I want to get something else. Can you work with me on that? And here's why. And I'm always happy to do that with clients. I don't want to be a lending library because I will go out of business. But you know, when people's tastes change, I want them to know that we're going to be there to help them, you know, to choose something that's going to delight them.
That is great. That is really great.
Yeah.
So to wrap up this conversation, which I think has been extremely, for me, an education for sure. Oh, I had a question actually about this ring with the dragonflies that Hilary liked. Were they behaving, or they were also a little bit
these it appeared that they were behaving. The heads of the dragonflies were sort of stylized, and if you could imagine, they were coming up from either side of the shank, and their heads were meeting with a rather sizable baguette diamond right in the middle. Sort of, you know, it's interesting. There's this idea of polarity of the male and female that was, again, for the cognoscenti, part of what Art Nouveau was talking about. So you will very often see in pieces by Lalique identical insects, one right and one left, around a central stone. It's not usually a valuable stone. It could be a citrine or an aquamarine or an opal. But I think I have to go back to my books and read if this is what he was intending. But I'm assuming that it had to do with polarity and the male and female energy in the active union, because he did it frequently enough that it would make sense to me that that's the case. And again, it becomes something that makes it really fun when you own something and you look at it on your finger, or you look at it in, you know, on your jacket, and you know that you've got a little private joke with the creator.
That's great. So I would like you to tell us if to recommend a book that you think is a good book to start an education in jewelry history and estate jewelry?
Wow. Well, if you're really serious, Understanding Jewelry by Daniela Massetti and, oh God, what's the man's
David
name?
Bennett?
Yes, David Bennett. That book's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that book is it's like a Bible. You just keep going back to it over and over and over again. That book is fabulous. I will say that if you before to learn about jewelry itself, if you want to learn about what it means to create and run a generational jewelry business, the new biography of the Cartier family by Francesca Cartier-Braquel is a must-read. It's about 500 pages long, but it reads almost like a romance novel. It's fabulous. And you get to see how the Cartier family started from nothing and how tenuous their success was, how unsure it was for many, many years, and how through not just hard work, but very, very focused social climbing, they developed the right clientele. And it's fascinating. And I recommend it because too often, especially in the diamond part of our industry, in the gemstone part of industry, it's all about the 4 C's. It's all about the price. It's all about the this and the that. And all of the romance and the human element of it can get lost. I think particularly now we need that human element. And reading the history of an important house like Cartier gives you a sense that it wasn't just an unbroken line. They almost went out of business many times. And how they became successful and how this whole thing actually happened gives us a sense that the jewelry industry is ultimately an industry of family businesses that have generational challenges, but also have fabulous gifts because they're family businesses. So those would be my 2 books to recommend.
That's great. Actually, Francesca is our next guest on the podcast.
Oh. Shout out to Francesca.
Your recommendation could be the whole introduction. I also read the book within, I think, 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also something very important, I guess, in our industry, one of the advice that the patriarch of the family gave to his son, and that goes down to the 3 sons and the Alfred, Louis, and Pierre, is be kind. I think there's something that I really liked, and you see the strong family values and kindness to employees and craftsmen throughout the book. I like this aspect as well of the story.
I agree with you, and it's funny because the first time I ever walked into the Cartier boutique on 52nd Street and 5th Avenue, they were not kind. Of course, by then it was no longer owned by the family. But
that's good. Just concentrate on estate jewelry up to 1974 when
exactly. But that's the thing. We sell pleasure. What we sell is happiness and pleasure. And if we aren't kind to our clients and to our employees, what's the point? Nobody needs what we sell. we sell happiness. So I agree with you, and I think that is maybe the most important point to take out of the whole book.
I like we sell happiness as a concluding line for this podcast. Ben, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, Sonia. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Me too. It's been such a pleasure, and we will link this podcast to the Macklowe Gallery, so our audience can find out more if they haven't already registered to your newsletter. And the website also has tons of really, really interesting educational information, as you mentioned, videos, but also notes about the highlights of the gallery and the different, and especially on Art Nouveau, as you said. And that's really an amazing source of knowledge. So thank you so much, Ben. I wish you well, and hopefully we'll soon be out of this virus crisis, and everybody can come back to visit your gallery in New York.
You will be hopefully the first one I get to invite.
Oh, thank you so much. I wish you a good day, Ben.
Merci, au revoir.
And au revoir.
Thanks for joining us, the Jewelry Connoisseur Podcast. If you enjoyed this and would like more top-quality jewelry content, check out the Jewelry Connoisseur blog at jewelryconnoisseur.net.